Hey you, if you like my videos, not that long ago I started a second channel for anime content. I made a video where I turned the entire plot of Death Note into a read-along picture book. It was kind of insane. And I got another video coming out in like a few weeks. Mr. Weebology, go check it out. Alright, anyway, enough of that, on to the video. Enjoy! Hello there. This is my son. His name is Charles Uphead. What's Uphead, you ask? Nothing much. What's up with you? But let's be serious now. What's actually up this head is a timeline spanning nearly 7 years detailing the events which took place between my purchasing of and eventual completion of cult classic game Cuphead. Now, as you can see from the timeline, my biggest mistake actually came right after I purchased the game when I decided that I should wait until I was less busy to complete Cuphead. Because then I blinked, enough time passed for all of the cells in my body to replace themselves, and I still hadn't beaten the game. But as you can clearly see, recently, that's all changed. And after 7 years of anticipation, I stand before you to discuss a single question. One that encapsulates the incomparable experience of playing a game so rich in personality, flavor, and heart as Cuphead. Is game hard? So yeah, I want to talk about Cuphead's difficulty. Let's dive into it. Now I should first clarify that when I say I completed the game, I didn't just beat all the levels and call it a day. I actually completed a perfect run of the game. Basically what that means is at the end of a level in Cuphead, you receive a grade for your performance. If you can meet a certain set of qualifications, you receive a perfect score. Do this across every level in the game, and you have completed a perfect run in Cuphead. Sounds easy enough, until you realize that some of those qualifications are things like beat the level without getting hit, or beat the level in under 2 minutes. And yet in every level you have a whole army of anthropomorphized plants, animals, and Lovecraftian horrors trying with every fiber of their being to halt you in your tracks or ruthlessly rend your soul from your very body. So if you're some sort of freak of nature with a negative reaction time, hands sculpted by the gamer gods, and enough Adderall to send a full 200-pound adult into the 12th dimension, then yeah, you can just bang that out in like an afternoon. But unfortunately for me, I did not grow up in Xavier's School for Gifted Pub Stompers. I had to play this game like a normal person. But now that I've completed the game, let's get into what's actually important here, the results. But weird man, you may be wondering, difficulty is so subjective and relative. How do you present that in a way that even makes sense? Well, worry not, dear viewer, for after beating this game, I created a 5-point system for measuring each level's difficulty. And after ranking all the levels, I drew up a cute little thermometer, both to visually represent my results, and also to represent the unbridled rage which I experienced while playing this game. So let's start things from the bottom with the easy levels. You know, the ones that coax you into a false sense of security so that you play the first few levels and think, okay, this game's not so bad. And then a bumblebee and a clown come in from the top rope, bash you over the back of a skull with a folding chair, and send you at terminal velocity towards an oncoming train. But we'll get to those levels later. First, let's talk about Goopy. I beat Goopy in a grand total of 5 minutes. The hardest part about Goopy was remembering to parry all of those little question marks above his head so that I could meet the parry quota for the level. It's the first level in the game, it is by far the easiest level in the game, and it is the quintessential example of exactly those deceptive levels that I was just talking about. And unsurprisingly, alongside Goopy, about half of the levels in this first section come from the first aisle of the game. The root pack is more or less a basic introduction to a lot of the common attack patterns that most of the bosses are going to throw at you throughout the game. And Cagney, that guy, while having some tricky attacks up his sleeve and some challenging platforming bits, only has 2 phases to his fight, both of which leave his hitbox wide open. We also have a couple outliers in this section, like Funfair Fever, the run and gun level from aisle 2 that's biggest challenges were basically just learning how to avoid some cannonballs and dodging around some flying condiments. Or Werner, there's so many complicated names. The Rat, who's a boss from aisle 3 who, once you learn a few simple attack patterns, you just gotta make it through the first wave and then the spread shot clears through the next 2 waves like butter. What really surprised me though was how easily I was able to get a perfect score on the penultimate boss, King Dice. And I think this might be kind of a hot take because I've seen a lot of people online talking about how infuriating this boss is, which is fair. It's basically 10 bosses in one. But I think the reason I rank this so low is fair, so hear me out here. In order to get through King Dice with minimal difficulty, just don't be bad, stupid. Only babies think this level is hard. Little idiot babies with little idiot brains. Hey, look everybody, this is you. Look everyone, I'm a little dumb child, little baby, little idiot. Wham, wham, crying, wham. God, don't you feel stupid now, little baby? That was a joke, I'm sorry. So really it boils down to like 3 things. 1, because there are more bosses, all of them individually have far more complicated attack patterns and far less health than a normal Cuphead boss. 2, also because there are more bosses, you get more time to beat the level. And C, throughout the level, you can get up to 3 extra hearts that don't take away from your health total at the end of the level. And all of these are things that you can take advantage of if you just learn the timing on the dice roll and then figure out which mini bosses are easiest for you and keep resetting the level until eventually you get a layout where the mini bosses you like have the extra hearts. Wait, hark, do I hear the sound of keyboards typing out impassioned messages about how reloading the level until you get good RNG is cheating? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that we were expressing sympathy for the man who has literally rigged this entire game in his favor. This man is literally working for Satan. Chew. Moving to the next tier up, we've got the levels that are noticeably tougher, but still pretty manageable. And here we have a pretty even, mixed bag of levels from all over the game. Ribby & Croak's, Hilda, and Briny Beard's levels are only really difficult in their last phases. The first phases are all pretty simple attack patterns that are easy to adjust to. But admittedly, the final phases do crank it up a pretty significant notch. Treetop Trouble and Forest Follies were only as difficult as they were because I had yet to piece together that putting on the invincibility super makes run and gun levels infinitely easier. And Jimmy and Sally are only really difficult because they have a lot of phases with a lot of different attack patterns and strategies. Not because any of the individual phases themselves are particularly difficult. With that said, out of all of these levels, I listed Sally as the most difficult one because even though I felt like I was making really good time in every single phase of her fight, the fastest I ever got on her level was exactly 2 minutes and 1 second, which I need to be so clear right now, is absolutely 1 second over the 2-minute requirement for getting a perfect score on a level, but my game definitely bugged out and just gave me the perfect score anyway, so we take those. And because the game showed me that shred of mercy, I shall spit on that sign of weakness, and down in this tier is where Sally shall remain. Next up is the second to last section. Pretty aptly to the thermometer, this is where things really start to heat up. In contrast to the run and gun levels from the last section, we have Funhouse Frazzle, Rugged Ridge, and Perilous Piers, all of which I did use the invincibility super for, and all of which still made me wish that I could use my real-life uninvincibility super to jump into a pit of starving, coke-addled tigers armed to the teeth with live grenades. Funhouse Frazzle just uses this crazy reverse gravity mechanic and throws like 10 trillion projectiles at you to disorient you. Rugged Ridge has a lot of enemies that are literally just walls blocking your way, this super time-consuming elevator portion, and it ends with this long platforming section where you basically have to jump from narrow platform to narrow platform while also being chased by a Discord moderator. And Perilous Piers is just generally hard to begin with, and then it ends with this section that just gives you some of the most unforgiving multitask heavy platforming that this game has to offer, period. Meanwhile, there are levels like Wally, Calamaria, and Dr. Cal that are just the perfect example of the pinnacle of difficult plane levels. With Wally, the last 2 phases take you from dodging a series of eggs orbiting around the most incel-coated bird that I've ever seen into a bullet hell against heaps of trash and a raw rotisserie chicken that is just at a really awkward shooting angle. With Maria, her final phase basically just forced me to pick a god and pray that when she hit me with an unavoidable petrification ray that I wouldn't run into one of the many obstacles that that portion of the level throws at you. And for Cal, his first phase basically has 3 weapons that are all firing at you all at the same time. And although you can destroy these weapons in any order you want to switch them out for different weapons, genuinely, no choice is the right choice. They're all just really hard. Then there's Beppy and Grim, who make me genuinely ashamed to say that I ever wanted to be a clown and or dragon when I grew up. Beppy just forces you to make a lot of risky decisions and go through a lot of rigorous platforming just to get off enough damage to beat the level in time. And Grim throws what I would call a middling to low level of projectiles at you throughout his entire fight, but the level is made exceptionally more difficult because the ground is exclusively moving platforms, and your target is typically positioned oh so inconveniently behind you. But of course, while these levels will all unquestionably haunt my dreams for many years to come, compared to the final 4 levels on this list, these levels that I just mentioned are a breeze. Leading off for this last category, we have Baroness Von Bonbon. Although to be honest, Bonbon herself is kind of the least of your concerns in this level, because for the most part, outside of occasionally busting out her double-barrel peppermint piece, or throwing her head at you you like a trajectory-shifting dodgeball, all she really does is bark orders at others from the top of a nice, tall, fortified castle. Like a cuck. But either way, the hardest part of this level by far comes from its first phase, where you're basically thrown into a mini boss rush against 3 out of a potential 5 confectionery combatants, and you would think that the mini bosses are what makes this phase hard, and don't get me wrong, they certainly aren't cutting you any slack, but what really makes this phase so impossible is the fact that your only reliable source of parries for this entire level comes from these little pink jelly beans right here. And between not being able to reach the jelly beans because you're running away from the mini bosses, accidentally destroying the beans while trying to shoot the mini bosses, or just taking damage from the beans when you whiff your parry, these puny little pink punk-ass menaces present a greater challenge alone than some of the full normal bosses in this game. And following Bon Bon, we have Rumor Honeybottoms, whose level, much like Grimm's, takes place entirely on moving platforms. Except in Rumor's case, several of her phases have multiple different attack patterns that can be thrown at you randomly, and the sheer quantity of projectiles that are thrown at you is much greater than what you experience with Grimm. Top that off with the fact that basically all of her parryable items are not that easy or safe to land on, and what we're left with is a level where if I were given the choice between having 1,000 actual bees sting me on my actual wiener or having to perfect this level again, I would drop trial without a second thought and I would be grateful. And then we have the final 2 levels, which by my 5-point system ended up tying for first place in how excruciating their gameplay experiences were. The first of which being the Phantom Express, in which you only have a single small platform to stand on, you're forced to constantly intercept enemies trying to forcibly move you into danger, the hitboxes on all of the enemies are pretty difficult to reach, and the amount of either abundant projectiles or immense stage real estate taken up by things that will damage you upon contact is unreal. Of any boss level in this entire game, I would say that this one is the most consistently technically challenging and relentlessly unforgiving. And finally, fittingly enough, sitting at the top alongside the Phantom Express is the final boss level of this game, the Devil. And while I would say that the second and fourth phases of this fight aren't quite as challenging as any of the Phantom Express phases, the first and third phases of the Devil fight outpace even the hardest of the train phases, with the first phase having you avoid any of 6 potential different attack patterns that will be thrown at you, including a number of pitchfork maneuvers like summoning a bunch of fireballs that fly straight at you, or a number of transformations, like the one where he covers basically the entire screen in what I can only imagine is his long Furby transformation. And then with the third phase, I mean, the amount of stuff being thrown at you from literally every angle is just entirely crazy. I don't know if I can even properly explain it. Just take a look for yourself and take note of the headache that's developing as you are simply just watching this insanity unfold. Pair all of this with the fact that this level is tied for the most HP of any boss fight outside of the airplane levels, which are given a lot more health than the normal levels, and you have a level that is very much worthy of the title of final boss of both this game and also my Night Terrors. And so if you take a look at these final standings, you have an in-depth ranking of all of the Cuphead bosses by their respective difficulty. And you know, I think what we have here is great. But when considering the initial question of whether or not Cuphead is in and of itself a difficult game, when looking at these results, the answer still feels a little bit muddy. So what's missing here? I mean, I guess if I were to look at it critically, trying to equate the challenge level of an entire game solely to the difficulty of its levels is kind of basic. But equating it to the difficulty of every phase of every level is kinda sick. Beside me now is a 4-point grid system categorizing every phase of every level of Cuphead. And for the sake of really digging deep into this question, I decided to measure 2 variable factors, with the difficulty of every level on one axis, and how much of that difficulty boils down to skill versus RNG on the other axis. How long did this take to make? A while. Could I have done something more productive with my time than making this chart? Don't ask me that. After all, why ask me questions like that I'm not gonna give you a straight answer to when you could instead ask me questions about my findings on the chart. For example, although you might think that a level's phases might be in around the same area on the chart based on the challenges that they provide, there are actually a lot of levels that bounce around drastically from phase to phase. Take Jimmy, for example. Some phases of his fight are pretty easy, others are on the tougher side. Some have pretty straightforward, predictable patterns and strategies, others are about as predictable as a casino built in the middle of a minefield on top of an active volcano. And you may have also noticed that on the vertical ratio of easy to difficult, we have a surprisingly even ratio, with 35 levels falling on the harder end, 3 smack dab in the middle, and 38 falling on the easier half. Perhaps leading one to believe that these levels are not as overwhelmingly difficult as some claim, and that perhaps those who do make such a claim are in fact bitch-made. But I assure you, dear viewer, it is merely your untrained eye which is the bitch-made one here. For if we take a closer look at the data points, 5 of these entries are mini-bosses from the Bonbon level, and another 10 make up all the bosses from the King Dice level, all of which are designed to be notably easier than your standard Cuphead boss, meaning that out of all 38 of those easier sections, a whopping 15 of them come from 2 levels. And what's more, out of the remaining 23 entries, nearly half of them come from the first aisle of the game, which is intended to be easier than the later worlds. In other words, although the chart may seem to infer that there are just as many easy levels as there are difficult ones in this game, the data actually suggests that these levels are slanted far more on the difficult side, particularly as you progress further in the game. But what particularly piqued my interest about this graph is that there seem to be 3 different dead zones where nothing ended up landing on the chart. These were in the bottom left, being high RNG and low difficulty, the top right being low RNG and high difficulty, and smack dab in the center, which seems to suggest that levels which rely on factors you can't predict will never be entirely easy, whereas levels that have no element of chaos whatsoever can never be the hardest levels, because the lack of randomness means those levels are only as hard as you are bad at video games. So get good, forehead. As for the middle, I suppose a level that doesn't really lean on either RNG or difficulty is going to end up being a level that's certainly balanced, but would also probably end up being kind of boring, forgettable. So if anything, I suppose that this blank section in the middle is really just a big thumbs up to the developers for making levels that are actually enjoyable. But of course, we're not here to measure joy. We're here to measure the cold, hard facts. And you know what, now that I look at it, the cold hard facts are kind of telling me that this chart is basically the same thing as the thermometer, but just with extra steps. So that still doesn't really answer the question of whether or not this game is actually hard. I mean, don't get me wrong, it certainly provides a greater sense of context for which parts of which levels are difficult and why, but I don't know. It still doesn't feel like it gives you a sense of Cuphead's place amidst a sea of difficult games. Alright, no, I get it now. The problem isn't that I'm not going into enough detail about Cuphead's difficulty. The problem is that I'm trying to compare Cuphead to itself. I mean, what have I been thinking? If I just list the components of a game that make it difficult without comparing it to other games, how do the people even know that the game that I'm talking about is even that difficult? So, okay, let's engage in a critical discussion of Cuphead's difficulty compared to some of the most difficult games historically. As you can see, I have compiled a list of some of the most infamously difficult games out there and categorized them by— have I not played any of these games? I haven't played any of these games. Why have I not played any of these difficult games? What am I supposed to do? I can't make a thinly veiled video essay about how good I am at video games if I don't have any other notoriously difficult video games to compare this one to. How else are people going to know that I'm cool? So, okay, maybe what I have so far isn't thorough enough, but there's gotta be some sort of classification system out there that does work, right? Should I try using game reviews? I could compare my death tally in Cuphead to the average death tally in video games.
Wait, is there an average for that?
1,000 gamers rate Cuphead's difficulty from 1 to 100. Let's look at which run and gun stages make me most wish I was a heavy drinker. I've combed through 20 Cuphead playthroughs and marked down every time somebody used the word difficult.
Is there a place where I can find average game completion times?
Rating games by their most attractive bosses. Look, I'm not saying I want to have sex with a fish. I'm just saying I get why some people want to have sex with this Which of these games have broken the most controllers? Total uninstall numbers for challenging games. How likely is this game to send you to a site? Top 10 impossible games. Measuring games difficulty based on tiers produced in liquid ounces. Which Cuphead bosses peaked in high school? How many of these games can be beaten in average cost of wall repairs per game?
Let's put every game's hardest boss in a room together.
Can it be beaten with a banana? Measuring the rate of deaths per minute. Which games made you feel true sadness? I did it! I finally did it! Before you is a list of every single game I have ever played. Each game has been measured on an extensive 500-point scale of every single potential aspect of difficulty which a game can possess, accompanied by a minimum 2,000-word report on the rationale behind my decisions. And now we will spend the next 6 hours analyzing each and every one of these games to determine once and for all how difficult is Cuphead. So now, without further delay, let us open up the folder and start with the first game, which is not only the first game of the Super Smash Bros. Franchise, it is also the first game that the first game that I ever remember playing. Sorry, just you know, when I first played this game, I was about 4 years old. I went to a McDonald's with my family, and there was an N64 in the play place, and that N64 happened to have Smash Bros. On it. So my brother and I started playing, and the game only had a few characters. I think it was just Mario and Link, and there weren't that many maps. I think we only played on Hyrule Castle. But I remember my brother and I, we took a hold of our controllers, and before we knew it, the game had kind of taken a hold of us too. And if I were to venture a guess, I wouldn't say it was because the game was difficult. The little whirlwind would appear on the side of the map, and we would bust a gut as it launched our character up to the top of the map. We would watch how Link would slash his sword, or the fact that Mario was shooting fireballs without a fire flower, and we were astonished. The joy that we took from that game wasn't from its high skill ceiling or its challenging mechanics. It was the sights, the sounds, the feel of a janky N64 controller in our hands. It was the feeling of experiencing something new and taking it in for everything that it had to offer. And so we kept playing that game and every subsequent title to follow it, and over time, something changed in me. I stopped playing with items or stage hazards. Any match with more than 2 players was just uninteresting to me. I would train for hours to learn a single combo for a single character. The game stopped being fun for the vibrant sights, the cool characters, the simple joy of a casual free-for-all match. And it started being fun because it was a game that I was better at than other people. And suddenly, that became the sort of game that I sought out exclusively. Because what fun is a game if I can't use it to prove that I'm better than other people? I remember first hearing about this game that was coming out soon called Cuphead. I watched the trailer and I was so amazed. I've always loved that old 30s cartoon art style, and the worlds just felt so vibrant and colorful and full of life. Then I learned more about the story behind the game, the fact that the creators quit their jobs and remortgaged their houses just so they could pay for this game. And they weren't just putting that money towards making the levels more difficult or the mechanics more challenging. They were hiring a team of experts to help them with creating characters that were animated and drawn by hand, to make physical sculptures to scan into the game over the watercolor painted level backgrounds, to put together a full original soundtrack of live jazz, ragtime, and big band musicians. All of that sounded so exciting to me, and I could not wait for this game to come out so that I could get my hands on it. And then 7 years passed, and a game that I remembered for being creative and unique and inspiring became a game that I remembered for being hard. And I don't regret taking on this challenge. I think a little challenge from time to time is a good thing, but I do wonder if in all of those moments where I was so singularly focused on completing this task, if maybe there were some moments that I missed out on. Enjoyable experiences that I could have had if I didn't put so much stake on how difficult a game is or isn't, and just focused on enjoying the game, the whole game. Recognizing that yes, it is hard, but the difficulty is just one feature of the many that make Cuphead a game that is, most importantly, fun. Nah, that's stupid. Anyway, so back to the game list.